everybody, and welcome back to Uncovering Sexual Health. Today we're going to be talking about consent and the law here in British Columbia, Canada, that is. So come along with me and let's get learning. So here in Canada, consent is consent, and it is needed for any sexual activity, no matter what age you are. So I'm just looking on the Government of BC website, and it specifically, clearly states all sexual activity without consent is a criminal offense, regardless of the age. So if there is no consent, it is a criminal offense, and that is huge. So I did do a video just recently about what is consent and how do you give consent and what it might sound like, and the importance of that communication with anybody that you're engaging in sexual activity with, just to make sure that there's consent all the way. So consent, if there's no consent, it is a criminal offense. It doesn't matter what age you are. That being said, here in British Columbia, Canada, the age of consent for sexual activity is 16 years old. And that's interesting, because here in British Columbia, Canada, to get your driver's license, you have to be 16 years old. However, getting your driver's license, you've got a manual. You take a test, you do some practicing with a driving teacher or your parents, you take another test, and then eventually you get your license. You get certified to be able to drive a car. But for consent, there's no manual. There's no test, and the practice is kind of just whatever you're doing when you're with somebody and engaging in sexual activity. There's no quizzes about what does asking for consent sound like and look like, and what does receiving consent, giving permission for things, sound like and look like. I'm here to share some of that information with you because there's a lot of legal things around different ages of consent. Although a person who is 16 years old can consent to sexual activity, there are rules around it. They cannot consent to sexual activity to somebody who's in a power of authority, say maybe a coach, or a caregiver, say they're a person that needs some extra support with different needs. Anybody that's providing that care or support to that person, it wouldn't be a consensual sexual activity. So there are rules around it. So although 16 years old is the age when you're legally allowed to consent to sexual activity, some people are engaging in sexual activity at younger ages. So there's actually rules around that as well. So individuals who are 14 or 15 years old can legally give consent to sexual activity to somebody who is less than 5 years older than them. So a 14-year-old can consent to sexual activity with an 18-year-old as long as that 18-year-old is not in a power of authority, that it's not exploitation, or it's not a caregiver type person. So that person can consent to sexual activity. So then a 15-year-old could consent to sexual activity with the 19-year-old, and same goes as long as there's no power of authority. It doesn't go the other way though. It can't be a 14-year-old with somebody less than 5 years younger. It only goes above. There are rules around 12 and 13-year-olds as well. So the rule for 12 and 13-year-olds, if they're engaging in sexual activity, because we do know it does happen, and we just need to make sure that we have the best interest of everybody at heart. So 12 or 13-year-olds are legally able to consent to sexual activity as long as their partner is less than 2 years older than them. So a 12-year-old can consent to sexual activity with a 13-year-old, or a 13-year-old can consent to sexual activity with a 14-year-old. They just need to be within that similar age range. And that helps because cognitively we're developing at different rates. A 16-year-old brain is a lot different than a 12-year-old brain. So they're just really keeping all those kinds of things in mind, and to make sure that there's no manipulation, exploitation involved in any of these types of relationships. So sexual exploitation. there's rules around that as well, which is great. Specifically for 16 and 17-year-olds, and they are not legally able to consent to sexual activity if their sexual partner is in a position of authority. So that would be like a teacher or a coach. A 16 or 17-year-old, consent is not legal if that 16 or 17-year-old is dependent on the older person for any type of care, such as maybe somebody is in a wheelchair and needs support for hygiene. So the person that is supporting them or caring for them in that way, it's not legal for them to have a sexual relationship. So for 16 and 17-year-olds, if that relationship with the older person is exploitative, for example, if the person's in a role of authority or power, or they're trying to influence the young person, or kind of being manipulative, any of those kinds of things is not consensual. And the 16 or 17-year-old is not legally able to give consent. There's also a lot more information on the website around, there's also a lot more information on this website about sexual offenses, child sexual offenses, child pornography. And what I'll do is I'm just going to put up a list of some of this information for you to read. And also I'll give a link to the website. There are also a lot of laws around. There are also many other laws here in Canada and rules that people need to abide by to keep individuals safe, and these include child pornography laws and exploitation laws and luring children and sexual tourism. I will include some of that information here just at the end of this video for you to read over. So the main takeaways from today's video are that there are age restrictions around consenting to sexual activity, and these are put in place to keep people safe. So if I review it, 16-year-old individuals are able to consent to sexual activity as long as the other person is not in a power of authority or exploiting them, or there's an obligation to have sex with them. And the rules around 14 and 15-year-olds, where they're legally able to give consent to sexual activity as long as their partner is less than 5 years older than them. And for our younger folk who might be engaging in sexual activity, the 12 and 13-year-old individuals, as long as the older partner is less than 2 years older than them, that it's legal to consent to sexual activity. And this is really important information for youth to know so that they can make informed decisions about their choices around sexual consent and sexual activity with others. And this is also really important information for adults to have to ensure that they're keeping children safe. If you have any questions, comments, or want to know more information, please leave them down below, and thank you for watching. Stay safe and sex positive.